There we go. We're up and running. We're up. Well, this is a hard crowd. So, yeah.
I've never thought of myself as a hard person.
Mm. Okay. We're 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 up and running now against my better judgment. So, welcome those of you who are watching, which is nobody's live yet, but this is going to be held in posterity for many, many years. And yes, that'd probably be a good idea. Cropping a video is probably not a bad idea. So, okay. While we're waiting for some folks to get on here, does anybody have anybody got any birthdays you want to share? Anybody know any birthdays? September 11 birthdays? Well, I got a few. I don't have a whole lot, okay? It was really, really a slow news day, except for the obvious, But a few things that y'all might know, a few people. So Glenn may be into this a little bit more than others. If you like football, it's a good birthday day today. Because today, on this date in 1913, Paul Bear Bryant was born. So Bear Bryant, happy birthday to him. He was born in Morrow Bottom, Arkansas. Like, wow, he came from nowhere. But what I didn't know was I didn't know he died so early. He died in 1983. I didn't realize it was that early. But anyway, he was 70 when he died. 1924, in the same vein, Tom Landry was born. Longtime coach of the Dallas Cowboys. He was one of the last great guys, to wear a coat and tie on the sidelines and all that. Never without a coat and tie on the sidelines. But he was born in Mission, Texas. And he died in 2000. And then, ladies, in case y'all swoon over this guy, I don't know if you do or not, but on this date in 1967, Harry Connick Jr. was born. So, I'm glad to know. Well, I'm glad to say he is older than I am. That's very cool. So, anyway, he was born in New Orleans, Louisiana. So, happy birthday to Harry Connick Jr. 57 years old today. A couple of deaths on this date that I thought were interesting. 1987, Lorne Green died. Ben Cartwright died. He died from pneumonia after having heart surgery, and he was.
I just saw him on TV.
Good night. Anyway, he was 72. And then, going back to football, in case you care, 2002, I don't know, I guess I'm shocked. I just thought he would have died long before this. But 2002, Johnny Unitas died, the great quarterback from the Baltimore, I guess, Colts back then. But anyway, he died of a heart attack. He was 69. All right, a few events on this particular date, again, other than the obvious. On this date in 1916, the first true self-service supermarket opened in Memphis, Tennessee. Do you happen to know the name of it?
Piggly Wiggly.
That's exactly right. It was Piggly Wiggly. Yeah. First true self-service supermarket.
He's over there working that thing over there.
Yeah, he's on his phone. He's probably cheating. He's either playing some game or else he's looking up these things. But on this date in 1941, I really did think that this was interesting, the connection with 9/11. But on this date in 1941, the construction of the Pentagon began, and just completed about a year and a half later in January of 1943. But so construction of the Pentagon began, and that's also the date that it got struck. But 1951, Florence Chadwick. Anybody recognize that name? She became the first female to swim the English Channel. She was a long-distance swimmer. So she went from England to France, and she did it in 16 hours and 19 minutes. If I got to swim for 16 minutes, I'm tired. But she swam for 16 hours, 19 minutes, made it across the English Channel. 1967 was the premiere on this date, the premiere of the Carol Burnett Show on CBS. This date in 1970, Ford introduced the first, its first subcompact car in the in North America. Do you happen to know the name of it?
Taurus. Maverick.
Pinto. Two for two. Yes. Remember, it's so small. I think that was an ugly car. Oh, somebody in here probably owned one. But with my record in cars, I can say it's ugly because it was ugly.
He's got that thing working.
Night. Can you hit that door right there? 1977. On this date, the Atari game console was released. So changed the video game industry forever and ever. But in fact, it's so funny because me and Jennifer found an old Atari that we had. She found it up in the attic. The only problem is, and so we want to pull it out and play it again because we got the games and everything. The problem is we can't find the little controllers for it. But as soon as we find those, we're going to start playing our Atari again. But released on this date in 1977. Next year, 1978, I thought this was interesting. The last known person died of smallpox on this date. Nobody else has died since then that we know of, but died in Birmingham, England. And then 2017, y'all might remember that was when Hurricane Irma hit Florida and Georgia. But then, of course, the big news on this date that the Twin Towers were struck, and the Pentagon was struck. Other things were intended to be struck. I guess the White House was a target. And so the old question: Do you remember where you were? How do you not remember where you were on this particular date? Anything interesting about where you were on that date when you heard about it?
I was at home, that's all I know.
Home? Okay.
Also my way to work, and when I first heard it, my initial thought was like, are they doing some replay of the War of the Worlds thing? And then I realized like, oh my gosh,
This is the real
this is
stuff.
Yeah.
a real, it's a real
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah.
I thought it was a joke. I saw it come up on my internet.
That's why I
and
said
was
War of
like,
the Worlds, yeah.
Well, I was on my way to work then too. I was actually between churches and working in retail, and I was on my way and I was listening to my favorite morning show, which at the time was Stephen DC in the morning. I don't know if that's even still a thing, but they stayed on air a little bit extra long. I thought that's kind of weird that kind of thing would draw that kind of response, and so we had just like today. You can walk in, nothing can be quiet. There's got to be background music, And so we had music that we were supposed to play, but I thought, I'm not doing that. There's got to be something going on. And so I pulled up a radio and actually that we sold. and I just listened to what was going on. And of course, it wasn't until, I don't know, I worked in mid-afternoon or maybe it was 5, I guess it was 5 o'clock when I got off. And so it wasn't until then that I got to actually see the videos, but.
I was working in Wilmington Island, I went to Applebee's, I said, I'm gonna go to lunch, and of course, they got TVs in there, so.
Right. And
They used to go to Applebee's.
I mean, it's one of those things that you watched 100 times over, but you still could not fathom. Yeah. I mean, it's just, you couldn't believe what you were seeing, even though you saw it 100 times. And then they'd show a million different angles and all that. So many things have happened since then. And I don't know, it's almost, to me, sometimes the most sobering thing is I started seeing some reminders, last night of how 23 years ago from last night, people were going to bed and their plan was just to catch a flight, to do what they always did and go to work like they always did. And first responders, they were preparing for work like they always did. And yet it would be the last night in their bed, So certainly sobering times, and we declared that we would never forget. And I guess we haven't forgotten the event, but we probably forgot all the lessons we were supposed to learn from it, or at least we act like we have.
One thing
So.
I remember about that stemmed from that was something Franklin Graham said, when people want to do different monuments and whatnot at the ground zero, and one of them was a mosque was wanting to be built or something relating to that. And Franklin Graham said, we can't deny them that right to do that, because the minute that we deny them their right to do that, we're going to start having our right to worship as we want denied.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Anyway, that is September the 11th. It's not everything, but it's a lot. So, anyway. Okay. All right. So, Marion, I have to call her out by name. Marion, we know that you're here. So, she's been tuning on for weeks now. And she's like, I don't think y'all can hear me. I don't think y'all know that I'm there. So Marion just wants you to know we know you're here, and we're glad that you're joining with us. In fact, she would come when she could from before. So anyway. Yeah, she's on the computer. Okay. Take out your Bibles. Turn to, September 11th. Turn to Revelation 11th. Okay. Through every major phase in God's economy, He's always sent prophets to preach the message, to preach His message. You can go back to the Old Testament and there's Isaiah, there's Jeremiah, there's Elijah. There's all these great prophets who came to preach. You move into the New Testament and the era of the New Testament, and you had John the Baptist. You had as soon as they had some clue as to what Jesus was about, which probably didn't happen until Pentecost. The apostles went out and they proclaimed around the world. Of course, you had Paul. You move into the early church era, and you had Polycarp and Irenaeus and other guys that we probably don't know quite so well, because we don't really keep up with church history all that well like we should. But there were great men who preached early on. Then more recent times, but still seem to be kind of old to us, you had Charles Spurgeon and those guys, and you can name some great preachers of our day. God always sent messengers preceding something big that was going to happen. And it was usually they were preaching a message of repentance, which really is one of the things that, for the most part, you don't really know who's going to be big, down the line. But it's kind of something that differentiates our age today from these great ages of preachers, because you don't find a whole lot of great preachers preaching great messages anymore. Now, what I mean by that is not that there aren't good communicators. There are good communicators who are out there, and there's some people that y'all, if you have a chance to, you'll listen to them on the radio, watch them on TV, gather podcasts or whatever. But these people that I'm talking about, they were usually preaching a message of repentance and revival and sin and warning and those kinds of things. And the reason that I'm saying that there may be those preachers today, we just don't know yet, is because those are not the ones who are celebrated. Those aren't the ones who have 10,000 people showing up every Sunday at their church. Those guys are the ones who are telling good jokes, and they make everybody feel good, and they give all the how-tos and all that kind of stuff. And it's not that those things are wrong necessarily, it's that they're missing and when I say we, I'm talking about what I do now, my profession, I guess my calling. We're not celebrated if we preach that kind of a message, but neither was like Jeremiah. if I were to ask you, tell me someone who was converted under Jeremiah's preaching, and if I gave you till next week, and you can go through and read all of Jeremiah, you can you can go look him up in a concordance and read all of his background and all that kind of stuff, you're not going to find anybody, because nobody listened to him. Everybody just looked at Elijah like he had three eyes, because he was weird, man. I mean, he had to do some weird. God asked him to do weird things, like go build a Lego set, in the middle of town and then go kick it down because that's what God's going to do to y'all. It's just kind of weird. He just did weird stuff, and so they're usually not really that well respected in the time of their ministry. It's not until later on that they're appreciated for their message. Because even like the people that I know, we want to be relevant, and we want to be appreciated, and want to be popular and famous for what they talk about, and want to be followed, and that kind of stuff. And I'm not so sure that there is a place for that. I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer. I'm just trying to figure out if there is a place for both. I don't know if there is. Maybe. Charles Spurgeon had a large crowd, and he was rough, man. Jonathan Edwards, oh my gosh. One of the greatest thinkers that America has ever produced happened to be a preacher. Certainly one of the greatest thinkers that Christianity has ever known was Jonathan Edwards. And of course, he was responsible for the First Great Awakening here in America. But man, he was rough. Man, he was brutal. Like brutal. He, sinners in the hands of an angry God. Talking about, holding people over a fire, and it was rough. And a message that people, he ended up getting, like after 21 years, he was asked to leave his church, Can you imagine giving yourself to some place that long and then be like, no, we're tired of you. Go find someplace else to do this. And it's just, these people who are doing great things are usually the people who are not appreciated in their day. And so all that to say that the end times is not going to be different. When God is getting ready to do something big, He's going to send some preachers to preach His message, and that message is going to be, it's going to be brutalized. It will not be popular. To the point that in that day it's going to be, nowadays you just shut them off. If I get up and I talk enough about sin, then, people in the church they're not going to be happy, and people outside of the church, they're going to talk about how mean and hateful and bigoted I am, and that kind of stuff. Because that's the only recourse you've got. Let's get rid of him, or let's bash him, or let's go to a different church, or whatever. That's all the recourse you got, which is bad. It's bad for a preacher in today's age, but it's not life or death. And in the end times, it will be okay to take such a one out. But the only thing that is going to keep these guys alive is going to be because God will not allow them to be killed until a certain point. And as soon as His hand comes off, boom, they're going to be dead. So you can go through and read chapter 11. You can get ahead of me. That's fine. It won't bother me. I'm still going to study it, But just for now, just so you'll know, their message is not going to be popular either. And so it's not going to be health, wealth, and prosperity. It's not going to be everybody, let's be happy. And it's not going to be a how-to, except for how to be saved. How to escape this judgment that is coming upon the earth. And so, anyway, that's kind of what we're looking at in chapter 11. So the context again is we've been going through. We've been given an unfolding of the judgment of God upon the earth. This is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. And then let's take a break and talk about meanwhile back at the ranch. And so one of those meanwhile back at the ranches began in chapter 10, and we looked at chapter 10. We've already studied chapter 10, and so you can look at those. Those will be. I just found out those have not been posted yet, but they're going to be posted probably tomorrow. You can catch what chapter 10 was all about. And that leads us to chapter 11, which chapter 10 is not very well known. I mean, it's just not a well-known chapter, even for those who have studied the book and all that. It just doesn't really garner a lot of attention. But chapter 11 is a different story because it's talking about the two witnesses. And these are the two great preachers that I was talking about, that I've been referring to. And people know a little bit more about them. In the lead up to the introduction of these two great preachers that will be preaching is just a small couple of verses that tell kind of an interesting story. In Revelation chapter 11, and in verse 1, it says, "Then there was given me a measuring rod like a staff." Now this would have been perfectly understandable in the day that John was writing, because they measured. They didn't have they have a tape measure, with inches and put it up there. They measured in rods. If any of you have ever been to, I can't find mine. I should have looked for it sooner. But if you've ever been to the Ark Experience in Kentucky, they've got little measuring rods that talk about how long the ark is, and it is the distance that a measuring rod would have been in the Old Testament. And so they had measuring rods. They were lightweight. They were made out of the sticks that they found there. And it was like a staff because people would use them. They were lightweight, but they were also durable, so they used them as walking staffs. And someone said, "Get up and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it. Leave out the court which is outside the temple and do not measure it. For it has been given to the nations, and they will tread underfoot the holy city for 2 months." Now, this sounds really strange. Why are we going to measure something? And why are we going to use a rod to measure it? And then we're going to use that same rod to measure people? Are we really talking about inches, feet, or even millimeters or meters or whatever? No, we're not talking about that. We're really not talking about measuring the length of anything. That's not what it's talking about, because we're not given the length of anything. It doesn't describe the length, the outcome of that, none of that. And not only that, but when you're talking about measuring the distance of a room or in this case, a temple or a building, that's totally different than measuring a person, okay? So what is it that we're referring to here? And apparently what we are looking at is God setting apart something, because he says, don't worry about the outer courts. Don't worry about where someone who is not Jewish, where the nations, don't worry about measuring that, because that's not going to count for what I'm talking about. The issue here is he is setting apart, once again, he is giving John a word of encouragement. That's what we need to remember. He is setting apart the inner sanctuary that was reserved for Jews and Jews alone. He's talking about the nation of Israel, that he is placing his special protection upon them. Now, why would that matter? You got to think so Candace, we were talking about history a second ago, the history that is behind certain passages. Well, you got to think about John's vantage point, John being a Jew, and the things that he has witnessed in his roughly 100 years close upon the earth. And what had to be fresh in his mind was something that would have happened probably 20 years prior to. And if you're thinking, well, man, 20 years was a long time for him to be dwelling on that. That's not true at all. Because what did we just get finished talking about? We could all talk about what happened 23 years ago today as if it was yesterday. Something just as significant took place, and maybe, honestly, I hate to say it like this, but more so to a Jew, happened probably probably 25 years earlier. So you're talking about the same distance, okay? And that was the ransacking of the nation or of the city of Jerusalem. To a Jew, that would have, rethink 9/11, if you will, to where it did more than just destroyed towers, to where many, many people would have. Now, I'm not saying that 2,500 is a lot. It's a lot. 2,600, whatever it was. But 1 million Jews died at the siege of Jerusalem. Not only that, but it wasn't just for, again, remember from a vantage point of a Jew, it wasn't just that which housed the economic center of the world at that time. It is what wrecked the religious center of that time, because when the Romans came in and they ransacked Jerusalem, they tore down the temple. They destroyed the temple. And so that was the center of all life for a Jew. Religious life, communal life, everything surrounded the temple, and now it was gone. And so they remembered everything. And so there was nothing going on since then. And to rebuild, kind of like what we've done in the 23 years, at least we have like a memorial that is there to this rebuild in its place. They had nothing to hang their hat on. And so the question has been, for all this time for them, has God forgotten the Jewish people? That's why Paul had to ask the question in Romans chapter 9, 10, or 11. I can't remember because all those are pointing to the same thing. Has God forsaken his people? And Paul's answer to his own question was, God forbid. No, he is not. And now he's answering through John. Not only is the answer no, but here is how. Here's how I will use them again. I'm going to set them apart, and I'm going to protect them, and they are once again going to be the focal point of my work upon the earth. Now, we've talked about this before when we looked at a timeline of history, and we used the whiteboard that's over here. In the Old Testament, the primary way that God spoke and worked in the world was through the nation of Israel. In today's age, the primary platform that he uses to speak and to work in the world is the church. Despite all of our flaws, it's not that we have anything to brag about when it comes to that. It's just his choice. And that's how he uses us. That's why we should uphold this book at all times and proclaim this book at all times unashamedly, without fear, no matter what comes our way, no matter what we're called or whatever, no matter how people reject us. This is our job. This is what we do. Not just me, us, the church as a whole. And but remember, what church is going to be left when the tribulation begins? None. There won't be one. And so how will God then speak through the world? His platform will go back to using the nation of Israel. So when he says, I want you to measure them off, set them apart, it's because they will be set apart for his own protection. And he is saying that in order to introduce these two witnesses that will be coming. Okay? Now, it is very interesting, something that might be interesting to you. How many, let's just throw this out there for fun. How many temples does the Bible talk about? Temples. Now we're not talking about synagogues, okay? The temple in Jerusalem. How many? Of which there is not one right now, right? There's no temple at the moment. How many does the Bible talk about? Anybody want to, just for Bible trivia? Anybody want to venture? What now?
I didn't answer my question.
Yeah, yeah. Glenn, like, this is y'all. Hey, I'm gonna leave y'all hanging. Glenn, what you should know, what you should say is, well, I know, but I'm gonna let y'all answer. That's what you should say.
I mean, some of the Greek God, if you want some of the Greek God temples and stuff.
No.
in there.
Jewish temple.
But you didn't say
The
Jewish temple.
the temple.
That one.
I would say one.
Okay, we got one.
How much? I said one.
Anybody got another guess? 5 Jewish temples. The first one was built by Solomon and it was the grand one. It was the huge one. The second temple was Zerubbabel's temple. Remember when in the story of Ezra and Nehemiah and all that, and they come in and rebuild the temple, and the question they ask is, that Ezra asks is, he's like, I know this is disappointing y'all, but hey, it's a temple. It's better than nothing.
Wasn't it the same thing being rebuilt?
It was being rebuilt. That's right. Yes, but Solomon's temple had been destroyed, and so they had to rebuild it. So that's number two. Third temple was Herod's temple that was built during the time of Jesus, and that is the one that was destroyed in AD 70. That John would have seen, he would have known about, he may have even witnessed the tearing down of that temple. Skip the fourth. The fifth temple is the one that will be built during the millennium, when Jesus is here on the earth and he is reigning once again. That's the fifth. This temple here that it's talking about in chapter 11 is the fourth temple. It is a temple that, if you remember, we talked about it before. If you don't remember, don't feel bad about it. But we have referred to it before, when the Antichrist is going to make an agreement with the Jewish people. And part of that agreement is going to be the rebuilding of the temple, and it will take place very quickly. It will be a reestablishment of the sacrificial system. They will be once again be able to sacrifice to God. The Jewish people will, during the time of the tribulation, at the beginning of the tribulation. And at the halfway point, and we'll talk about this in a lot more depth in sometime later. Sometime later. Ho, ho, ho. We're going to refer to it a few times. That we'll talk about it in chapter 17. Maybe again in chapter 12. But at the halfway point of the tribulation, that pact that the Antichrist made with the Jewish people, which is including, hey, build your temple, do your sacrifices, we're going to be at peace together, I'll help you. He is going to break that truce. And the abomination of desolation is going to take place. Now, I specifically talked about this once. I'll do it again several times over. But the abomination of desolation is explained in Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, where he's going to come to the Jewish people and he's going to be like, it ends. It ends today. You will not be able to carry out your religion. He himself is going to take the throne and sit on the throne of God. That is why it is going to be the greatest abomination that has ever taken place on the earth. Because that which is reserved for God as king of the earth and as the sovereign ruler of the world, there's going to be a man who is going to take that place and try to usurp that authority from God. It is going to be the greatest abomination, and it's going to be the greatest offense that the Jewish people have ever known. And that's why it's called the abomination of desolation. And it's at that point where, you remember we talked about this, you think this has been bad? You know, the judgments that have come to this point, it's about to get a whole lot worse because of what this man just did. And he's going to demand that he alone be worshipped. He will not allow the Jewish people to continue in their worship, because he's going to say, you must worship me. And so all this stuff is taking place, and so John is stepping in, and he has written these words. These will be words of encouragement to the Jewish people during the tribulation that says, hey, God's got a special protection on you. He sees what's going on. He is leaving them to their own destruction. And so notice in verse 22, leave out the court which is outside the temple. Don't measure it, because they don't have that protection. It's been given to the nations, the pagans, the non-Jewish people, the people who are not called by God. They will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. 42 months in prophetic time is 3.5 years. So, how long is the tribulation? 7 years. What is half of that? 3.5. Because at the 3.5 year point, he stops the Jewish religion, the Jewish practices, and he alone will demand to be worshipped. That's what it means. It will be tread underfoot. The abomination of desolation. And that at that point, he says, and we don't know the exact time, but it's going to be sometime around that time, that in verse 3, it says, I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses. They will prophesy for 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth. So it'll probably be right before that halfway point because, again, 1,260 days is 42 months in prophetic time, 3.5 years. It's a different way of saying it. Same way that we say, a month is 30 days, 31 days, whatever you want to call it. And so, again, let me point out, because we're going to stop there. But again, let me point out one of the things that we have said over and over again is that we take the tribulation to be a literal 7-year period. Some people don't take that. Some people don't believe that. They just say 7 is the number of perfection or completion. And so that, this judgment will be complete. All the events in Revelation, they will have taken place over however much time you want to give it. It's not necessarily a literal 7 years. I do. And this is why. Because I've said it then too when I've talked about this. Because it keeps saying it. 7 years. 42 months, 3.5 years. 1,260 days, 3.5 years. It keeps pointing to these literal time periods. Why would we not? It's referring to it. I don't know why we wouldn't. And so that's why I keep going back to that. Okay? All right. Questions. What questions do you have? If you got questions online, we got a number of folks watching online. If you have questions, go ahead and start typing them in. I'll look at this before we move to prayer time, and go ahead and type that in. Give you a second to, flex those fingers and for it to get to me. Any questions in the room that you'd like to ask? I know we've only covered 3 verses, but that was a lot. Questions in the room? Does that mean that you understand it, or does that mean that you are totally lost? You don't even know what to ask. That's how I feel sometimes. I don't even know what to ask. You want to?
Maybe a little bit of what you said.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't see anything online.
I did just think about something. So that the 2 witnesses are going to witness for, 3.5 years.
Correct.
Is that 3.5 years after the Antichrist sits on the throne, or the 3.5 years leading up to that point?
Okay, good question. Question is which 3.5 years are we talking about, or what is the 3.5 years? So,
Or is it in the middle of it somehow?
it is more than likely the best way for us to understand it, for it to make sense in my mind. Okay, somebody else might say something different. Somebody smarter than I, but it will probably take place. They will probably begin their ministry right before he does that. And here's why I say that. Because, so at the I don't want to muddy the waters. So at the end of their life, they are going to die. The Antichrist is going to kill them. Now, God will not allow that for a long time. But when he takes his hand off and allows them to die, Antichrist is going to kill them. And when he does that, we are then going to, it's probably at that time that the final set of judgments, the bowl judgments, are going to be unleashed. And those bowl judgments are going to happen within days or weeks of each other. Because that's going to be like the final straw. And once those bowl judgments are over with, that's when you got the Battle of Armageddon. That's when the judgment takes place. boom, 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 it's over at that point. And so most of their ministry is going to be like right toward the end. So if you back that up 3.5 years, that's probably right before the Antichrist takes the throne. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Anything else? I don't see anything online. Okay, well, good deal. Okay, so we're going to see their ministry next week, and we'll see a lot more of the, like what I've just kind of said and glossed over. We'll see it written down for us about their ministry and about God's protection and those kind of things. So, and their end. So it's going to happen. Okay, well, why did I go blank? That's weird. Okay, what prayer requests do you have? If you got prayer requests online, go ahead and start typing those in as well so that they can get to me before we get out of here. What prayer requests do we have? Well, first of all, do we have any prayer requests that have been given to us before we walked in here? Okay, so none beforehand. Any requests y'all have in the room?
My nephew has gone home from the hospital.
Okay,
He's still got some recovery time.
okay.
He was in hospital for 8 weeks.
8 weeks, okay. All right, so pray for Ann's nephew.
Gene Purvis.
Yes, Gene Purvis, we've mentioned him the last couple of weeks. But he is home now, but still got some recovery to do. So continue to pray for him. What else?
Joanne will be leaving next week,
All right. What day is Joanne leaving?
Thursday.
Thursday. Okay. All right. So let's be in prayer for Joanne. And now, is that an indefinite gone? Just okay, indefinite. All right. Heading back to Uganda. So, all right. You gonna handle that okay? Do we need to, I guess we need to pray for you too. Yeah. So,
Pray for her husband and their new life together.
yeah. And then 2 days after that, I'll be giving my daughter away. That's nuts. Anyway, we won't talk about that. All right. What else you got? Anything?
There's the men's walk for Walk to Emmaus is coming up this week.
Okay.
Leave tomorrow, right?
All right.
And then the women's is the week after.
The walk to Emmaus is okay. Okay. Well, let's go to God in prayer, and then we'll be out before choir. So. God, we thank you for the protection that you offer, and that nothing happens to us, nothing happens to your people apart from your allowance, which means even when it seems difficult for us, that still, in the overall grandest scheme of things, it is still that which is good because you are good. Give us a trust, give us an eternal viewpoint on these things, and may it be what sustains us, just like you gave words to John, words of truth that helped him see the bigger picture, that even in the midst of the tragedy that he had seen and witnessed and lived through, that there was goodness, that there was a plan, that when we all get to heaven, as we like to sing, as we look back, that we'll see the thread of your plan working through all of those things, and be able to rejoice and praise you for all of eternity. And so use that just to strengthen us. There's still pain, there's still hurt that we have to live through, but at least we know that it is not in vain. God, you know the requests that we have, certainly more than what has been voiced, but you know all those things, and so we come to you as you invited, as you asked, and we bring them to you. We lay them at your feet, and help us to trust you more and more. Enlarge our faith, so that when we give you these things that are personal to us, that even when it looks like you're not doing anything, just give us faith to know that you are, that it's that we're not wasting our time. Thank you for our time together as we do study your word, as we as we encourage one another and just be able to meet and have fellowship and draw strength from one another, and use that to sustain us until we can get back together again this coming Sunday. So God, you're good. Give us thankful hearts that we can also be an encouragement to the people who are around us. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Thank you all. We will see y'all Sunday, if not sooner.